From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and waiting with his weekly grain market segment, K-State's Dan O'Brien, where he'll take a close look at how increasingly adverse weather conditions may boost corn and soybean prices. And Dan will share his latest price probability projection for soybeans. Then K-State's Erick DeWolf will address that huge concern with wheat streak mosaic in this year's wheat crop and is urging you producers to take action to prevent a repeat of the severe crop losses attributed to that disease, starting with full and thorough control of volunteer wheat in the coming weeks. And later on, covering Kansas agricultural weather, K-State's Mary Knapp, all this and more. Straight ahead on Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Thanks for listening. And on the grain market scene, we see trades that are closely scrutinizing what's going on weather-wise with those summer crops. We'll take that up first as we visit once again with grain market economist Dan O'Brien of K-State Research and Extension. He joins us from his office in Colby, northwest Kansas. Dan, the USDA earlier in the week in its weekly crop progress and condition report lowered the condition of the corn crop, and the soybean crop as well showed some vulnerability likewise in those new numbers. But staying with the corn for the here and now, there are some genuine concerns that the markets are now having to digest.
Yes, in fact, in this last week, it seems that the markets sold the rumor of higher rainfall amounts coming in, and then when the rainfall that did come to some of those Corn Belt locations wasn't as high as it turned out, then they bought the fact. So we're reversing the normal mode of how grain markets go. But you can sure see on the U.S. Drought Monitor, we have extreme drought problems up in North Dakota, parts of Montana, heading off into South Dakota, and developing abnormally dry to moderate drought areas in most of Nebraska, and now even severe drought through a fair streak from northwest Iowa down to southeast Iowa. And again, you're running through some awfully important corn production areas of the United States. You're talking about eastern Nebraska and those parts of Iowa. And we have some dry conditions developing in various parts of the state of Kansas even. Again, in the north central area in particular looks like the worst part of that, and then heading towards through Oklahoma to the Texas Panhandle, some issues. Parts of Illinois and Missouri also having some dry conditions. So we have these conditions developing. It won't be but a couple days. Will be August 1st, and then asking ourselves the question of where we stand right now and what conditions during the month of August could bring for these crops. It is interesting when you look at NOAA, the U.S. Weather Service, basically, their projections for the month of August, universally in the whole continental United States, except for parts of Arizona and New Mexico and the Four Corners area down there, all higher temperatures than normal for the month of August. And, of course, worst in those areas we just talked about up in the Dakotas and Montana. Really not any shortfall of moisture, though. So if you get hot temperatures and normal moisture, well, that can work out pretty good, but you just don't want to be in some of those areas that are unfortunate enough to miss the normal moisture given the high temps. And as you move from August on into September, October, that forecast actually intensifies with the coasts getting hotter relative to the overall average, and the upper Midwest, again, Nebraska, Iowa, northern Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, all those areas, Michigan, all having some pretty hot temperatures. And again, moisture not really projected to be anything other than normal. But so again, if we have spotty moisture, if a region that any of us are living in would happen to miss rainfall, heading through August and September, that'll affect at least fill on these crops, and will have a lot to do with where the markets go. So here we've gotten to this point, and the grain markets have been, I think, justifiably volatile. The corn market been trading since about mid-June, anywhere from 365 up to 405. I guess I'd call that moderately volatile. To really get worried about the corn crop, I would think you'd see the lead futures contract go even, markedly higher than 405. We're talking about $4.50 to $5. We've been in this range of, again, about 365 to 405, closing yesterday at 374 for a good while. Haven't really shown any wild fears of a short crop. So it just really puts the onus on those crop reports that are coming up again. And I think August 10th, the September crop report, the October crop report, just a lot of potential volatility coming in, and not just to the high side, but in either direction. And there'll be a lot riding on how those numbers work out, not only for the corn market, but also now as we head into the more vulnerable times of the growing season for soybeans in August, as we're flowering and going through those stages of development. I think our attention will turn all that much more, not just to what's happened or has happened with corn, but what is going to be happening with soybeans. And again, the range we've seen since about mid-June has been from a low of about 905 up to a high of 1030, and closed yesterday at about 994. So we're having that type of movement in the soybean market, even though we've had, again, humongous production down in South America. So interesting times. We have anything but markets that have become convinced that we're going to have great crops and have started their slide off into harvest. We're still holding in these very volatile price ranges. And I would think, unless we suddenly get cooler temperatures and rainfall in some of our worst affected areas, I would think that this volatility and uncertainty will support prices at least through the August crop report. And depending on what we get from there, then we'll see what happens as we move towards September and October.
This does parlay into the latest price probability projections for soybeans that you've put together, and we do wish to cover here in just a moment. On the export front, the dollar is falling in value around the world. However, exports for feed grains are rather poor. Wheat is only so-so. The bean trade is pretty slow, so nothing has really gelled there of late.
We haven't had a short crop shock to the system coming to the degree that people can't get supplies elsewhere. I would say in our notes, if anybody pulls them off of Ag Manager, go ahead and look at the International Crop and Weather Highlights, dated July the 25th, and you see a good number of places around the globe that just aren't doing sterling in terms of their crop development situation. Again, a drought in a lot of places. Just real quickly, again, Southern Europe, Spain, Italy, the Northern Balkans, all having problems. A lot of heat, drought issues going on in Turkey. Ukraine continues to suffer. If anything, really the surprise in past years where we'd really pay attention to this, for some reason this year we're not so much. Lack of rainfall in some key growing areas in China, starting to affect their outlook for their crops. Australia's been suffering for a while. Have had some showers, but still haven't had enough to recover. There was a frost that hit the wheat-producing regions in southern Brazil that's at issue. And maybe the biggest factor for us that could affect the wheat markets is how this drought that we have in our northern states goes right across the border up into Canada. And it's really terminology being used that drought has intensified in sections of the southern prairies. Well, that's affecting their spring wheat prospects. So not just our spring wheat crop affecting the overall U.S. and world markets at play here, but also the damage going on right across the border up into Canada. So, if this is going to bring a massive change in the wheat market, then we've seen some movement in the futures, but gosh, the basis levels are still awfully wide. Maybe in our neck of the woods, Eric, perhaps that's reflecting the protein issues. Again, we're still watching the protein spreads down in Wichita from a cash price of $3.91 to 11% protein at $4.86, as was listed on yesterday's report, to 12% protein at $5.36, 13% protein at $5.76. You're jumping $1 from a basis of 90 under to it's more than $1 from 90 under for the cash price up to a 13% protein figure of 95 cents over. So somewhere out in here, the market's just pretty concerned about having adequate wheat protein for everything that we do with wheat, and just bears a lot of watching.
You bet. Now to your price probabilities as you put them together, comparing those to what the USDA numbers would suggest. And what's it going to take, to cut to the chase here, to see $10 soybeans again?
Well, something other than 48 bushel per acre yields here in the U.S. Again, if we didn't have such large supplies down in South America, I think we'd be $1 or $2 higher than where we're at right now. We'd be somewhat higher. But given what we've got and the impact on the world market, if we have a 48 bushel per acre yield, as USDA is projecting, prices of $9.40. Everything else being equal, if we get down to 45 bushels per acre, prices are probably $10.50 to $11. If the drought that we're seeing in the northern plains extends down into Iowa, parts of Minnesota, and that's the direction it has been, that we're fearful of it heading anyway, then you're down towards a lot closer to 3.5, 3.6 billion bushels for a U.S. crop. In our current world situation, you're getting closer to about $12 per bushel. What's the chances of that happening? Still judiciously, probably about 10% in seeing $12 a bushel soybeans. But the chances of seeing $10.50 soybeans, given the expanding drought, probably right now about 1 in 4. Of course, anybody that's dealing with cash soybeans, either as buyers or sellers, are all going to be watching that pretty closely.
Without a doubt. And again, if you'd like to pick through Dan's weekly notes on the grain trades, covering all of these factors that we've touched upon today and much more, you can find those now at agmanager.info. Dan, thanks once again.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
That from Dan O'Brien. He is a grain market economist with K-State Research and Extension and a weekly guest here on Agriculture Today.
Man, it's hot out here. Heat stress affects more than just humans. It also affects livestock. Extreme heat, humidity, wind speeds, and cloud cover all make a difference in air temperature. To control problems, make sure your livestock have shade and water provided at all times. This will help prevent problems in breeding, meat production, and reduce chances of death. Please take all these into consideration for livestock production. Brought to you by K-State Animal Science Leadership Academy participants.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. As we head into very soon now, another wheat planting season in Kansas, one of the headline issues that continues to draw attention, and deservedly so, wheat streak mosaic disease, which ravaged more than a fair part of the 2017 Kansas wheat crop. Joining us once more is wheat disease specialist Erick DeWolf of K-State Research and Extension. In fact, K-State and other agencies are collaborating to get the word out about dealing with wheat streak mosaic. More on that in a moment. Do we have any sort of concrete handle on the losses incurred in Kansas wheat this year at the hand of this disease, Eric?
Well, I think we're getting a lot closer. I think K-State and KDA partner each year to do an annual wheat disease loss estimate, and that's scheduled for just a short time from now. So I think we're getting close to getting the official estimate there. What we do know for now, after spending a lot of time out surveying throughout the growing season, is that the disease was definitely well above levels, and we know there were some real hotspot areas in west central Kansas in particular.
That would be the greatest intensity of wheat streak this year?
It appears so. Parts of Hamilton County, southern Greeley County, northern Ness County, parts of Lane County, Wichita County were particularly hard hit by this disease this year. Almost all of western Kansas was above normal levels, and even parts of central Kansas also above normal. So the amount of severity of fields, the amount of disease we're seeing in individual fields entire areas of regions of counties and regions of the state was much more widespread and much more severe than what we've experienced for at least a decade.
And where the pressure was the greatest, there were fields that were in fact zeroed out.
In fact, yeah, that was the case, is that wheat streak is particularly problematic in that it can be so focused in particular fields or groups of fields. Disease losses can be so severe that fields are completely abandoned or zeroed out. So we're hearing of many fields that were adjusted to less than 5 bushels, less than 3 bushels per acre. And I remember in some of those areas they would have been 50, 60 bushel wheat pretty easily. And to go from that level of yield potential down to almost zero is a big loss.
Now, wheat streak mosaic, as all know, is hardly a new pathogen to Kansas wheat production. It's been around for a long, long while, but several have described this as the perfect storm that came together to bring about this pressure this year.
Yeah, we think it has a lot to do with the things that were set in motion a year ago almost. So last July, last August, there was enough rainfall and enough volunteer wheat to get the population of wheat curl mites, the small little mite that spreads this particular viral disease, and the viruses themselves established during the summer months. And then going into the fall, we continued to have very mild conditions as well. Mild temperatures well into November in many cases. Some growers were reporting that they didn't really have a hard freeze until after Thanksgiving. So when we have above normal volunteer populations, mite populations, and going into the fall where they have plenty of time to move around, that definitely sets the stage for major outbreaks of wheat streak mosaic. And I think it was those things that were set in motion last summer and last fall that really translated into the above normal levels of wheat streak that we saw this year.
So again, several agencies have come together to work on the problem and to encourage producers to take what steps are necessary on their end to suppress wheat streak mosaic. This has been termed Stop the Streak, right?
It is. I think you're going to hear more about that type of campaign that KDA, Kansas Wheat Commission, and also K-State's involved with, of just trying to pool our resources, make sure that we're getting the word out. And you'll probably hear more about this campaign that we're calling Stop the Streak. And it's just referring to that wheat streak mosaic complex. Wheat streak is one particular virus in it, but there's others in there too. The triticum mosaic virus or High Plains mosaic virus, for example, all spread by the wheat curl mites and have very similar symptoms, all contributing to cause this particular problem that was so devastating for Kansas wheat growers this year.
Well, step number one, and every year we talk about it, but it's being reinforced this year for obvious reasons, controlling volunteer wheat and keeping that green bridge from developing that allows the curl mite to carry the disease.
It is. I think that volunteer wheat has got to be step one. And I think as I've been talking to growers during our wheat plot tours and other things that we were doing this year, I'm kind of putting it like this, that I think it comes down to a lot of these communities deciding that they've had enough with this disease and doing what they need to as a community to try and control the volunteer wheat. And some of that's just from the perspective that an individual grower can do a lot of things right. But if their neighbors, the community, doesn't do the same practices, doesn't follow those best management practices of trying to control the volunteer wheat, it can really nullify a lot of their individual activities. So wherever possible, these communities can be coming together in groups of co-ops or other groups of growers to try and do everything they can to make sure that the volunteer wheat is controlled, and that should greatly reduce the risk of repeat performance on wheat streak mosaic.
Just a side note on that, the timing of that control, is that critical to the intensity of wheat streak mosaic at all? I
think it is. So, all volunteer wheat is not the same. Two critical times. One right after harvest here that we're right in the middle of right now. We're at least a few weeks after harvest for most folks and maybe a month or more for others. The second, probably more critical one here is as we approach the planting time, it's important to break that green bridge and have dead volunteer wheat at least 2 weeks as a rule of thumb prior to the new wheat crop being planted and emerging. So if you're using a herbicide like glyphosate that needs some time to be active in the plants and cause the decline of the plants and eventually dry those plants out, it's those dead, dry plants that are going to decrease the mite population. And that's the condition we need to be in before our new wheat crop begins to emerge. So we're probably looking at a lead time of at least 3 weeks, probably 4 weeks prior to planting of our new wheat crop. So we're right in, the window is open here for some folks already, and we're probably looking at August being a critical month of trying to get those volunteer wheats in control.
So concentrate on that, and that is the first of the three-pronged approach to dealing with wheat streak mosaic. Variety selection, important here too, and there are varieties out there that can bear up decently against this pathogen.
Absolutely. So volunteer is got to be the top priority. I think it's a community effort, but what growers individually can be doing is related to their variety selection. So we know there are some varieties, particularly out of the Hayes breeding program, white wheat, Joe. There's a red wheat, Clara CL, out of the Hayes breeding program, K-State's breeding program there, that have a highly effective gene against wheat streak mosaic. Now, it's not going to be bulletproof, however, as we've seen in these heavy disease years that there are some potential risks here still. Those wheat varieties still have some vulnerability to the other viruses, Triticum mosaic or high plains. They're much less common, and hopefully will bypass or avoid the worst of the disease by using that. That resistance is also temperature sensitive. So if growers are still trying to plant their varieties early, say for grazing purposes, in the fall of the year when the temperatures are still quite high, that resistance isn't going to be as effective as it would be if they planted at a more agronomically normal time, say in northwest Kansas in mid-September, late September. So I think the other virus vulnerability and the temperature sensitivity are concerns that we need to be looking at. But in many situations, many variety performance tests, demonstrations, and producer fields that I've seen, those varieties that have that high level of genetic resistance often do fare much, much better than what we see in more susceptible varieties. There's also a few other wheat varieties that people might consider that just have intermediate levels of disease resistance or intermediate reactions to the wheat curl mite. So those are varieties like TAM 112. It's been out for quite a number of years. Been a pretty successful wheat variety in the region. Is also a pretty good parent line in some of our other breeding programs also. So varieties like Bird or Avery out of the Colorado breeding program would also be options for growers probably in that western tier of counties in Kansas as well.
These tolerance levels, by the way, are accounted for in the 2017 Kansas Wheat Disease and Insect Ratings, which are soon to be out from K-State Research and Extension. In fact, we're going to have you back soon along with Romulo Lolato to explore that data, but producers can check that out now online if they'd like. And lastly, planting date. That's been bandied about as yet another factor that may well have contributed to the wheat streak mosaic outbreak this past season.
Well, I think planting does play into this as well. So I guess I've worked with enough growers in western Kansas to know that many times they plant wheat when they have moisture. Moisture in year out is one of the major yield limiting factors that we have in our wheat production in Kansas. So it's not uncommon for us to see some growers go in and start planting their wheat in mid-August or the last week in August in that time frame. And I think that does elevate the risk of us having problems. Wherever possible, I would encourage them to try and delay that into the more agronomically acceptable time, what we often historically have referred to as the Hessian fly free date. That would generally reduce the risk of them having a severe wheat streak mosaic problem.
We'll have you back soon. Once again, we will visit with you about those wheat disease ratings that K-State is finalizing now. We appreciate your time. Thanks, Eric.
You're welcome.
Comments there on managing against wheat streak mosaic, which had a devastating effect on many too many Kansas wheat acres this past growing season. Erick DeWolf is a research and extension wheat disease specialist at K-State. Agriculture Today continues after the break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and continuing on with today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. While do no harm has been the battle cry from agriculture groups over the Trump administration's intent to renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement, one grains industry representative told Congress this week that damage already may have been inflicted. The House Committee on Agriculture questioned a variety of agriculture industry representatives as to what renegotiated NAFTA should include. The Director of Trade Policy and Biotechnology for the U.S. Grains Council, Floyd Gabler, told the committee that since the president announced NAFTA would be renegotiated, the Mexican corn market has taken hits. He says the Mexican government is looking to Brazil and Argentina for alternative sources of corn and other grain products. Gabler said the decisions have led to a 4% decline in U.S. corn exports since the beginning of this year compared to 2016. He went on to say that they expect further erosion if the shipments from South America materialize as they anticipate. The results, he says, demonstrate that the U.S. feed grain industry has the potential to realize gains from improved terms in a modernization of NAFTA, with Mexico a more significant contributor to those benefits than Canada. With a renegotiated NAFTA, Gabler said the majority of the increase in U.S. corn exports to Canada and Mexico would come from value-added products from livestock and other foods. Now, National Cattlemen's Beef Association CEO Kendall Frazier said the beef industry is more concerned about not losing gains in trade with NAFTA partners. He said it's difficult to improve on duty-free unlimited access to Canada and Mexico, and that they are pleased to see the Office of U.S. Trade Representative announce its support for continued reciprocal duty-free access. Still, said Frazier, the message remains the same: don't harm or jeopardize that access. On average, according to Frazier, Canada and Mexico have been two of America's top 5 export markets for beef at about $1 billion each in annual sales. In other testimony, the president of the National Oilseed Processors Association, Thomas Hammer, said that while his industry wants a future NAFTA to maintain gains achieved, there is a need to include a new chapter on biotechnology. That would include, he says, entering into an agreement with Canada and Mexico on the safety determination of biotech crops intended for food, feed, and processing. And representatives from a variety of other agricultural sectors told the committee there is a need to make changes to NAFTA. Former U.S. Secretary of Agriculture and current president and CEO of the U.S. Dairy Export Council, Tom Vilsack, said U.S. negotiators need to move fast to resolve problems with dairy access to Canada's markets. He said that Canada's dairy tariffs are well known, and over-quota tariffs top the charts at 241% for fluid milk, 201% for skim milk powder, 298% for butter, and 245% for cheese. Under NAFTA, says Vilsack, many are aware of the unfortunate fact, as he put it, that U.S. dairy exports are one of the very few sectors that do not enjoy duty-free access to the Canadian market. Vilsack said NAFTA has benefited the U.S. dairy industry enormously when it comes to liberating trade with Mexico. Mexico has grown into the largest export market for U.S. dairy. But he said that Canada, unfortunately, as he put it, has created a trade relationship with the U.S. on dairy that can best be described as heavily strained. Michael Conaway, the chairman of the committee, said renegotiating NAFTA could be beneficial to all sectors after hearing the testimony. He said he recognizes there is a level of angst about renegotiating the agreement that has provided so many hard-fought gains. He says, though quoting here, our nation stands to benefit from renegotiating a deal that provides additional market access and tightens trade enforcement. Retail beef prices are already below last year. However, the drought-induced sell-off of cattle could mean even more downward pressure on beef prices in a few months, according to a USDA economist. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
The drought in the northern plains is making life not so pleasant for cattle producers with little or no forage to feed their animals, but for consumers, it could bring on some lower beef prices toward the end of this year and into next. With pastures dried up, many northern plains cattle producers are having to sell off more than the usual number of their animals. Agriculture Department livestock analyst Shale Shagam says in a few months, when beef from this surge of cattle hits the stores,
we do expect with increased supplies of beef to have downward pressure on retail beef prices, and we would expect to see in 2017 the CPI for beef to probably decline around 2%.
This would be 2 years in a row now that the Consumer Price Index for beef will have declined. Last year, retail beef prices fell over 6%. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
And Japan will be increasing its duties on imports of frozen beef from countries it does not have an economic partnership agreement with to 50% from the current 38.5%, after trade data showed shipments during April through June exceeded the trigger level under safeguard mechanisms. That's according to the U.S. Meat Export Federation. This puts the duties in place on frozen beef through the rest of Japan's fiscal year through March 31st of 2018, and marking the first time those duties have been triggered since August of 2003. Japan's government is explaining the action to the U.S. and to other countries, according to its finance minister Taro Aso, and he said he was ready to discuss the matter with a high-level economic dialogue with Vice President Mike Pence later this year, if requested. Frozen beef accounts for about 20% of total Japanese beef imports. The Meat Export Federation recognizes that the safeguard will not only have negative implications for U.S. beef producers, but will also have a significant impact on the Japanese food service industry. Those are the words of U.S. Meat Export Federation President and CEO Phil Singh. Want to take a quick opportunity here to let you know that the 3 Kansas State University KLA Ranch Management Field Days have been set now for this coming month of August. The first field day will be August the 17th, that at the Black Diamond Angus Ranch near Spearville. Mark Diederich Family Farms, the site of the August 22nd field day at Greenleaf in Washington County, and DL Cattle Company will be hosting the August 23rd field day at a pasture near Fredonia. On the program at all 3 locations, Oklahoma State University livestock entomologist Justin Talley. He will be presenting fly and tick control tips at all 3 events. Other program details are being finalized and will be announced here in the coming days. Each of these field days starts at 3:30 in the afternoon and will conclude with the beef dinner at 6:45 that evening. If you'd like more information, go to kla.org, but again, be listening for more on the Kansas State University Kansas Livestock Association Ranch Management Field Days coming up in August. This is Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
You are tuned in to Agriculture Today, and now over to Kansas agricultural weather and this week's update from Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp. Mary, it might not be captured in this week's drought monitor because of the way that the monitor readings are set up, but we did have good general rains around Kansas from midweek on this week.
Yes, only the extreme eastern part of the state had some issues with the rain, a little bit more intense in that area, which created some flooding issues. But for the most part, the rains were very welcome. Almost as welcome as the rains were the cool temperatures that have filtered in behind that.
You bet.
A low of 65, 66, 68 is a whole lot more pleasant than the lows in the upper 70s that we had prior to this storm system coming through.
And just staying with the temperature for a moment, as you go back over the numbers for the official week that you track, hottest one of the year, you say?
Right. We basically set up our week to match what the U.S. Drought Monitor uses for theirs, which the cutoff is Tuesday morning. So when we look at that, statewide, we averaged about 5 degrees warmer than normal for that week ending on Tuesday. The central divisions were the hot spot as far as that goes. Their average high in those three divisions, North Central, Central, and South Central, was 100 or better. So very, very warm. And that, of course, created quite a bit of stress on all of the row crops. The evaporative demands were high enough that irrigation really wasn't of much use. Your plants couldn't translocate the water fast enough to avoid some wilting and some stress. The rains were very welcome. Again, what we saw for the most part was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours of a tenth of an inch or better. Not enough to completely erase any of our deficits, of course, but a very welcome steady rain that allowed most of it to penetrate. And again, having those cooler temperatures on the heels of that will allow the plants to uptake that moisture and actually benefit from it rather than have it go straight into a steam bath and basically lose all benefit from it.
So when folks look at that latest drought monitor, they need to understand that those rainfall amounts from Wednesday on are not included there. That monitor will likely improve next time around, will it not?
It's very likely that it will improve next time around. And again, it'll depend upon where those rains fell and how much it offset those deficits. And we should note that the temperatures are also featured in that drought monitor because it goes into that evaporative demand, what the surface water supplies are like, how the soil moisture is behaving. So there are quite a few parameters that go into that drought monitor, but precip is the driver for most of those.
One side note here, and it's a plus, Mary. This rainfall has prompted emergence of volunteer wheat, which, as we talked with Erick DeWolf of K-State earlier in the program, needs to be controlled for purposes of suppressing wheat streak mosaic disease. So this is something of a plus.
Right. Having that moisture to start filling the profile in anticipation of your fall wheat planting, and as you noted, getting that flush of volunteer started so that you've got a timely manner to control it. It'll also be beneficial to have a dry period on the heels of that so that you can get that field work done and get that wheat controlled. What we would like to avoid is a repeat of last year where you had several flushes of that volunteer wheat, and it seemed like as soon as you got it controlled, you were back in there and had to control it again, which, given the cost of treatment, was very difficult to get accomplished.
Well, let's get into the outlook then, and we're looking at an extraordinarily pleasant weekend temperature-wise, aren't we?
Right, and this cool spell, and it is cool, the high of 86 would be about 6 degrees cooler than what we would expect at this time of the year. That is expected to continue at least through midweek of next week. We may not get back up till 90 until Wednesday or Thursday. The interesting question will be how much will that skew our July temperatures, which we'll do that summary next week. Statewide for July to date, we're running just about 1.5 to 2.5 degrees warmer than normal for the month. Not likely to be a record-setting July by any stretch of the imagination. And if we stay 6 to 7 degrees cooler than normal for the weekend, that will trim those numbers back even more.
Moisture ahead because we don't want the momentum to cut off here. What are we talking about for next week?
Well, the interesting part is that it looks like the West is going to be the winner on the moisture. And I should point out that when we look at the month to date for July, the division that's closest to normal is the Southwest. They are 99% of their normal precip. But anyhow, looking at this week to come, they are calling for a very strong monsoonal flow into western Kansas, eastern Colorado. They may see as much as 3.5 inches, and that excess moisture is expected to make its way all the way up into northwest Kansas and into Nebraska.
And northwest Kansas is in need.
Yes, northwest Kansas has not benefited as much as the west central and the southwest divisions. Again, as we noted, the southwest is about 99% of normal for the month. The northwest is only running 45% of normal, so kind of the disparity that we've gotten in the distribution. When we look again at that quantitative precip outlook for the week, while the west is expected to enjoy quite a bit of moisture, the northeast, the outlook is for nothing. So we may get a few drops out of it, but the overall pattern is that we should be dry for the next week. When we look at the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day outlooks, temperature-wise, the cooler than normal conditions are expected to continue all the way through the first week in August. But when you look at the precip, both periods are shaded slightly towards drier than normal. So we'll just see how that plays out, see if that moisture actually makes its way into western Kansas and how far east it manages to push.
Very good. Mary, enjoy this weekend ahead. Thank you for coming over, as always.
Thanks, Eric.
Talking with us, Kansas agricultural weather, research and extension, climatologist here at K-State, Mary Knapp. Thanks to you as well for being along with us, and do enjoy your weekend likewise. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.